A police officer stood beneath the fading streetlights of Maplewood, Missouri, his badge tucked away, his uniform replaced by a rain-soaked jacket. His face carried the hollow weight of rejection. At his side, two German shepherd pups pressed close, trembling in the cold, too young to understand why the world had turned them out. Only nights before, he had been cast from his own sister's house. The last door of family slammed against him. No one expected him to rise again. No one believed those pups would matter. But in their eyes, he found a reason to keep fighting. And in a forgotten envelope inside his late father's wooden box, he uncovered a secret worth $8 million. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel to watch the next stories by clicking the subscribe button right below this video. Thank you. Amen. The late autumn air in Maplewood, Missouri carried with it the faint scent of the Missouri River, a sharp mixture of damp wood, mud, and cold iron drifting from the docks. The river town, small and weary, seemed to breathe slower after sundown. Streetlights cast orange halos onto cracked sidewalks, their glow barely reaching the hushed, leaf-strewn alleys. In the distance, church bells tolled 9 times, their sound muffled by the wind that scurried across the rooftops. A thin drizzle had fallen earlier in the evening, leaving the pavement slick, reflecting the faded neon of a nearby diner and the headlights of trucks rumbling along the main road. Into this fragile quiet walked Ethan Cole, a man whose steps carried both the weight of duty and the ache of abandonment. Ethan was 35, his tall, broad-shouldered frame shaped by a decade in the Maplewood Police Department. His dark hair, once neatly trimmed to regulation standards, had grown slightly unruly around the edges, a result of restless nights and neglected mirrors. His face was angular, his jawline firm but shadowed by stubble, and beneath his hazel eyes lay the bruised crescents of exhaustion. He wore his police jacket unbuttoned, revealing a plain gray shirt damp from the mist. To anyone watching, he appeared as the archetype of the weary officer, resilient in posture, yet hollow in gaze. Those who knew him best, however, would have recognized the deeper scars, an inner turmoil carved not by crime alone, but by loss. His wife, Anna, had died in a car crash 2 years earlier, an accident Ethan replayed endlessly in the quiet hours, convincing himself he should have prevented it. Since then, a silence had followed him home each night, heavy as a shadow. Trailing close at his boots were 2 bundles of restless energy. Rusty and Willow, the puppies he had rescued only days earlier from the wreckage of a pickup that had overturned along Highway 19. Rusty, the larger of the two, was a 4-month-old German shepherd with a coppery brown coat streaked with black along his spine. His ears already stood erect, and his bark, too big for his small chest, sounded like a challenge to the entire world. He was brave, impulsive, quick to place himself between Ethan and anything unfamiliar, and though still clumsy, he carried himself with the attitude of a future guardian. Willow, by contrast, was smaller, her coat a softer tan with subtle white markings on her paws. Her left ear drooped endearingly, and her amber eyes seemed perpetually wide, as if the world were too large and too cruel. She pressed close to Ethan's leg whenever strangers appeared, shy yet achingly affectionate, the type of creature who sought safety in human touch. Ethan had named them after the things he longed for. Rusty for resilience, Willow for the gentleness he feared was slipping from him. That night, his destination was not a barracks, nor the dim apartment where he had been struggling to keep up with rent, but the cream-colored house on Sycamore Street where his 2 older sisters lived. They had grown up together in that same town, sharing the same stern father and the same modest upbringing, yet their paths had diverged like opposite sides of a river. Ethan had chosen service and law, living paycheck to paycheck, clinging to ideals of duty. His sisters had chosen stability, each marrying, each securing homes and families, though not without cost. When Ethan climbed the steps to their porch, Rusty tugging at the leash and Willow trembling against his shin, he paused. The house glowed from within, yellow light spilling through lace curtains. He smelled the faint trace of roasted meat and bread comforts that for the first time in months made his stomach tighten with longing. He lifted a hand to knock, then hesitated, his knuckles hovering against the wood. This was not a man asking for charity, he told himself, only for a temporary haven. His salary had been cut with the department's budget. His apartment lease had ended. He had no family left but them. He rapped 3 times, each knock echoing into the cold night. The door creaked open and Sarah Cole, the eldest of the siblings, appeared. Sarah was in her early 40s, tall and willowy, with ash-blonde hair pulled back tightly into a bun that revealed the fine lines etching around her temples. She carried herself with the precision of someone who valued appearances, always neatly dressed, her blouse pressed, her skirt falling just below the knee. Once she had been tender-hearted, but years of raising 3 children while managing a bookkeeping job at the county office had hardened her demeanor. Her husband had left her a decade earlier, taking little but leaving behind a bitterness that never quite faded. Her voice, when she spoke, had a clipped edge, as though rehearsed in caution. Behind her stood Elaine Cole, the middle sister, shorter and broader in build, her hair a darker shade of brown streaked with silver. Elaine's cheeks flushed easily when she was flustered, and her heavy brows gave her face a permanent air of disapproval. She had married Richard Carter, the owner of a hardware store downtown, and though she lived comfortably, her pride was as rigid as the shelves her husband stacked. Elaine had always been the blunt one, unafraid to say what she thought, often without compassion. "Ethan," Sarah said, her tone flat, her eyes drifting down to the 2 puppies tugging anxiously at his boots. "It's late." "I know," Ethan replied quietly, steadying Willow with a hand. I need a place for a while. Just until I find something else. Rent's gone up. The department cut hours. These 2 need a roof, and so do I." Elaine stepped forward, crossing her arms. "You can barely provide for yourself, Ethan, and now you've taken in strays. We are not obliged to raise you and your animals. This isn't a kennel." Rusty let out a sharp bark, startling both women. Willow whimpered, pressing her head against Ethan's knee. Ethan kept his voice even, his training as a police officer steadying the anger that rose in his chest. "I'm not asking for forever, just until I can sort things out, please." But Sarah's face, lit by the soft lamp behind her, softened only slightly before hardening again. "You need to face reality. You can't keep expecting us to carry you. It's time you stood on your own, Ethan. We have our own families to care for." Elaine nodded briskly, her lips tightening. "Pack your things, brother. You'll figure it out, you always do." The silence that followed was broken only by the distant rush of the river. Ethan inhaled slowly, then bent to scoop up Rusty, who wriggled restlessly, still growling low in his throat. He motioned for Willow to follow, her tail tucked beneath her as she scrambled after him. Together, they descended the porch steps, the warm glow of the house fading behind them. For a moment, Ethan turned, the sight of his sisters framed in the doorway searing itself into his memory. He had once called this place home. Now, it was nothing more than another closed door. From across the street, behind the veil of a curtain in the small brick duplex, Martha Green watched. Martha was in her late 70s, her once tall frame now bent slightly from years of labor. She wore her silver hair in a loose braid that fell over her shoulder, and her face, deeply lined, bore the marks of hardship endured. Yet her blue eyes remained sharp, reflective of both sorrow and resilience. Martha had lived alone since her husband, a Korean War veteran, had drowned in a boating accident decades earlier. Left with 2 children who had grown distant, she had carried on quietly, her life pared down to tending a garden and feeding stray cats that lingered around her back steps. She knew too well what it meant to be turned away by family, to be left with only the echo of voices that once promised permanence. As she watched Ethan walk down the wet pavement with 2 small figures at his side, her chest tightened. The drizzle had returned, clinging to the lamplight like silver threads. She saw the soldier's sun cast adrift, and she recognized herself in his posture shoulders squared against the cold, yet heavy with the ache of rejection. Martha pressed a palm against the glass, whispering to no one but herself, "Not again. No one deserves that again." Ethan did not look back. Rusty barked once more, Willow whimpered softly, and together they disappeared into the night, swallowed by the silence of Maplewood's narrow streets. Behind them, 2 sisters closed their door, unmoved. Across the way, a widow's heart opened in sympathy. The drizzle had turned into a fine mist by the time Ethan Cole and his 2 pups reached the edge of Maplewood's highway. The glow of the town fell behind them, replaced by the long black stretch of asphalt that led toward the interstate. There, clinging to the roadside like a forgotten relic of another decade, stood Hank's Fuel and Service, a rundown gas station that had been closed more often than open since the larger chains moved in on the outskirts. Its cracked neon sign buzzed faintly, half the letters dark, and the smell of gasoline clung to the air as stubbornly as the damp. Ethan pushed open the grimy glass door and led Rusty and Willow inside. The interior was dim, lit only by a single buzzing fluorescent tube above the counter. A rack of dusty chips and faded soda bottles still stood in one corner, though the register was locked and the cooler silent. Hank, the owner, had retired the previous year, leaving the building to sit half-abandoned. Ethan had once patrolled here during late-night shifts, checking on drifters who stopped to sleep in their cars. Now, irony stung as he rolled out his thin blanket near the counter, turning the pup's leash into a makeshift tether so they would not wander off. Rusty immediately sniffed the air, pacing, tail high, ears sharp. Willow hesitated, circling before curling into the crook of Ethan's arm, her trembling easing only when she felt the rhythm of his heartbeat. Ethan stroked her head absently, staring at the rain streaking the dusty glass. The image of his sisters slamming the door against him replayed in his mind, the sting deeper than he wanted to admit. He had faced violent men, desperate addicts, and the chaos of emergencies without flinching, but the rejection of bloodkin gnawed at him like nothing else. He shifted his duffel bag onto the floor and, as he had done countless times before, rummaged through it for his change of clothes. His fingers brushed against something hard beneath the fabric. Pulling aside his worn shirts and the folded police jacket, he revealed an object he had all but forgotten. A wooden box, small, darkened with age, the brass latch tarnished. It had belonged to his father, a man Ethan had spent most of his life trying to understand. His father, Robert Cole, had been a factory worker, tall, quiet, with a back bent by decades of hauling machinery. He had rarely spoken more than necessary, but his silences had carried weight. Robert had died of a sudden stroke 5 years earlier, leaving Ethan with nothing but debts and memories. Ethan remembered the day of the funeral, the way Robert's calloused hands had seemed smaller in death, the way neighbors had spoken of his generosity, stories Ethan had never been told at home. This box, tucked away at the back of his father's old closet, was one of the few possessions he had kept. Ethan placed the box on the counter, the pups watching curiously. Rusty barked once at it, suspicious of anything new, while Willow inched closer to sniff before pressing her nose back into Ethan's sleeve. He unlatched the brass lock, the creak echoing through the quiet station. Inside lay folded papers, brittle at the edges, and a thick envelope sealed with wax, untouched for years. Ethan held it with both hands, his breath caught in his throat. The weight of it felt heavier than paper should be, as though it carried something more answers, perhaps, or a burden he had never expected. He did not open it yet. The wind rattled the thin glass panes, and Ethan turned quickly, instinct trained from years of duty. But it was not danger only, the creak of the door opening slowly. Standing there, wrapped in a faded blue coat, was Martha Green, the widow from across the street. Her frame was small against the doorway, her hair pulled back beneath a woolen scarf, her lined face softened by lamplight. She carried a basket covered with a cloth, the smell of warm bread rising from it like a comfort Ethan had nearly forgotten. "I thought I might find you here," Martha said, her voice low but steady, touched with the accent of a woman who had lived her entire life in the Midwest. Her eyes drifted to the pups, softening as she set the basket down. "They told me once long ago that when you have nothing left, you still share what you can. I brought food." Ethan rose awkwardly, unused to kindness he hadn't earned. "You didn't have to, ma'am." "I know," Martha replied simply, pulling out a chair. She was the kind of woman who had carried hardship without bitterness, whose compassion came not from plenty, but from loss. Decades ago, her husband had drowned in the river, leaving her with 2 children she struggled to raise. Those children, now grown, had drifted away to lives of their own, rarely visiting. Loneliness had carved her, but instead of hardening, it had left her tender toward others abandoned. She watched Ethan break the bread into pieces, sharing it with Rusty and Willow, who ate eagerly. "You remind me of him," Martha said softly. "Who?" Ethan asked, brow furrowed. "My Henry," she whispered, the name catching in her throat. "A man who gave too much and never asked enough. He came back from Korea different, quieter. People didn't understand him, but he always carried stray dogs home, said they needed him more than anyone, and I suppose he needed them too." The silence stretched, filled by the sound of the pups chewing and the rain ticking against the roof. Finally, Martha leaned forward, her eyes sharp again. "You can't stay here long, Ethan. The city'll call this trespassing soon enough. But I know of places out by the edge of town, old houses, vacant. Folks left them years back when the mills shut down. No one's claimed them. They're run down, but with a little work, they could be shelter. Maybe even a start." Ethan listened, the words sinking into him like seeds into soil. Shelter. A start. He glanced at the wooden box, the sealed envelope still waiting like a silent witness. Something about it all felt connected, as if the past and the future had chosen this moment to meet. Rusty barked suddenly, standing stiff at the door as if to guard them. Willow pressed her head against Ethan's knee, eyes wide and trusting. He stroked her ears and exhaled, the storm inside him easing, if only slightly. That night, under the dim flicker of the fluorescent tube, Ethan stretched out on his blanket with the pups curled close. The wooden box rested near his head, its presence a reminder of questions yet unanswered. Martha's words echoed in his mind. Old houses. Vacant. A start. He let the thought settle like an ember. He did not know yet what the envelope held, but for the first time since his sisters had cast him out, the darkness felt less final. Somewhere beyond the rain and the abandoned gas pumps, perhaps, waited a place where doors opened instead of closing. The night had deepened, its silence broken only by the faint hum of the highway and the occasional hiss of a truck's tires slicing through wet pavement. Inside the abandoned station, the lone fluorescent tube sputtered, casting a weak halo over the cracked linoleum floor. Ethan sat cross-legged on his blanket, Rusty sprawled across his boots like a vigilant sentinel while Willow curled into his lap, her small body rising and falling with every measured breath. The wooden box rested on the counter, and in his hands was the envelope, still sealed, still heavy with the mystery of his father's silence. His thumb brushed over the brittle wax seal. For a moment he hesitated, haunted by the memory of his father, Robert Cole Stern, quiet, distant. Ethan wondered if opening it might reveal not treasure but disappointment, some final reminder of how little they had understood one another. But something in Martha Green's words earlier that evening, her story of old houses, of beginnings waiting in the ruins, had struck him. Perhaps this was the first stone in that path. He broke the seal. The paper crackled in protest, and he pulled out a small stack of documents, yellowed but intact. At first his eyes skimmed without comprehension, but then the words cut through his fog of fatigue. Trust agreement. Beneficiary, Ethan Cole. Account value, $8,000. His breath caught, a low exhale escaping before he even realized it. He turned the page, scanning details. A property deed for land near Jefferson County, investments accumulated from post-war compensations, dividends reinvested through decades. His father had hidden not just a fortune, but an entire legacy. Ethan lowered the papers to his lap, staring at them as if they might vanish. Willow stirred, pawing gently at his arm, while Rusty barked once at the sudden tension in the room. Ethan let out a short laugh, bitter, incredulous. $8 million, he whispered, shaking his head. Dad, you never said a word. The figure was overwhelming. It was enough to erase his debts, buy houses, start anew. Yet, as the weight of it settled, another feeling grew heavier: responsibility. He had sworn his life to protecting others, and now here was wealth vast enough to shape not just his life, but many. Sleep was impossible after that. Ethan lay awake with the pups pressed against him, the documents tucked back into the envelope. His mind ran wild with questions. Why had Robert kept this secret? What had he hoped Ethan would do with it? And what would happen if anyone else discovered? By morning, the drizzle had cleared, leaving the air sharp and cold. Ethan stepped outside to let Rusty and Willow stretch, the pups bounding through puddles with renewed energy. Rusty chased a crow across the cracked lot, barking with triumphant fury, while Willow lingered near Ethan, her cautious eyes scanning the quiet road. Ethan rubbed his tired face, the weight of the envelope still pressing against his chest beneath his jacket. He was not alone for long. A faded blue sedan pulled up along the roadside, its tires crunching against gravel. The door opened, and a man in his late 50s stepped out, wearing a brown wool coat with a sheriff's badge glinting faintly in the morning light. Sheriff Dale Harmon was tall, with thinning gray hair combed neatly back, a square jaw softened by age, and deep-set blue eyes that carried the calm of someone used to disputes. He had known Ethan since boyhood, had even coached him on the baseball field years ago, but now his gaze was more official than fatherly. "Morning, Ethan," the sheriff said, his tone even but curious. His eyes flicked to the pups. "Heard you were camping out here." Ethan straightened, shifting slightly in front of the station door. "Just needed a place to stay for a night. I'm not causing trouble." "Didn't say you were," Harmon replied, lifting a hand. "Just making sure you're all right. Folks talk. Your sister said you've been having..." difficulties. His eyes lingered as though he sensed more than Ethan was saying. "If you need help, you can come by the office." "I'll be fine," Ethan answered shortly, grateful but guarded. Harmon studied him for a moment longer before nodding, then returned to his car. Ethan watched the taillights vanish down the highway, unease stirring. The fewer who noticed his situation, the safer the secret remained. Back inside, Ethan gathered the documents again, this time reading more carefully. Legal jargon swam before his eyes, but the essence was clear. His father had created a trust to be released only upon Ethan's 30th birthday, but Robert had died before he could explain it. Somehow the papers had been overlooked, hidden in the box. Now, 5 years later, they lay in Ethan's hands, their value undiminished. As the morning wore on, the station door creaked open again, this time without hesitation. Martha Green entered, carrying another basket, though this time it was filled with jars of preserves and a thermos of coffee. Her sharp eyes caught the stack of papers spread across the counter. "I see you found something," she said, her voice soft but knowing. Ethan hesitated before nodding. "My father left more than I expected. Money, land, too much for one man." Martha set the basket down, her expression unreadable. "Your father was a quiet man, Ethan. Quiet men often carry heavier burdens than they let on. Maybe he trusted you to know what to do with it." She poured the coffee, her hands steady. "Just remember, wealth can save or it can destroy. Depends whose hands it falls into." Her warning lingered, and not without cause. By afternoon, whispers had already reached ears beyond the station. Sarah and Elaine Cole, Ethan's sisters, sat in Sarah's tidy kitchen across town, the smell of coffee mingling with tension. Sarah had heard the first rumor from a neighbor who claimed Martha had been seen delivering food to Ethan. Elaine had pressed further, cornering a clerk at the county records office. Between them, the pieces formed a picture they did not like. Ethan might be heir to a fortune they had never known existed. Sarah, tall and severe as ever, tapped her manicured nails against the tabletop. "If it's true, he's been hiding it from us. 8 million. Do you know what that could mean for our families?" Elaine, her face flushed with indignation, crossed her arms. "He doesn't deserve it, Sarah. He's reckless, always has been. Took strays instead of building a real life. He'll waste it on foolish causes. We have to intervene." Their tone was not of reconciliation but calculation. They spoke not of mending bridges, but of strategies, approaching Ethan with feigned sympathy, pressing for details, manipulating guilt. Neither sister admitted aloud the envy that gnawed at them, but it hung thick between their words. Back at the gas station, Ethan remained unaware of their scheming. He sat with Rusty gnawing at a stick and Willow curled in his lap, the document spread out once more. He felt torn between temptation and obligation, between the chance to rebuild his life and the call to honor the sacrifices his father had made. He remembered Martha's warning, his sister's cold rejection, the trust placed in him by comrades long gone. The envelope had given him not only money, but a question. What was he meant to do with it? The sun dipped behind the clouds again, the station's dim light flickering on as shadows deepened. Ethan folded the documents carefully, sliding them back into the envelope, his jaw set. He did not yet have answers, but he knew one thing. Whatever path lay ahead, it would not be for himself alone. The first hard frost of the season glazed the fields outside Maplewood in pale silver. The sun rose reluctantly that morning, casting long shadows over sagging barns and shuttered mills, reminders of the town's best years long gone. On the edge of that quiet landscape, Ethan Cole stood at the crumbling gate of an old cul-de-sac, his breath visible in the cold air, the papers from the trust folded carefully in his jacket pocket. Rusty bounded ahead, nose pressed to the ground, his bark ringing through the stillness as though he intended to chase away ghosts. Willow lingered closer, her ears twitching with unease, amber eyes scanning the broken windows and weeds pushing through cracked sidewalks. Ethan had made his decision. The secret his father had left him could not remain a secret forever, and it would not be squandered on selfish comfort. He envisioned something beyond himself, a place of shelter, dignity, and belonging for those who, like him, carried scars invisible to others. He had given it a name during his sleepless nights at the gas station. Haven's Shield. Martha Green, wrapped in a heavy brown coat and scarf, shuffled up beside him. Despite her age, her eyes sparkled with purpose, the lines of her face softening whenever she looked at Rusty and Willow. She carried a canvas tote filled with notebooks, bread wrapped in cloth, and a thermos of tea. This place, she said, gazing at the row of vacant houses, wasn't always like this. Families used to gather here for block parties. My Henry and I once danced in that very street. But time can be cruel. Maybe you can teach time some mercy. Ethan nodded. He could already see it. Peeling paint stripped away, roofs repaired, laughter spilling through open windows again. The money would provide the means, but it would take hands, sweat, and a vision rooted in resilience. That vision gained flesh a week later when volunteers began to appear. At first it was only a handful, an old carpenter who owed Martha a favor, a retired nurse who had once worked with Ethan on an overdose call, and a local boy named Daniel Price, 17, lanky with messy brown hair, freckles scattered across his nose. Daniel's father had left years earlier, and his mother worked long shifts at the diner. Daniel carried an eagerness to prove himself, hauling boards and hammering nails with a determination beyond his years. He was quiet, but his admiration for Ethan was clear in the way he mimicked his movements, watching Rusty and Willow as if they were heroes. The first days were chaos. Windows shattered by vandals had to be boarded, doors rehung, floors cleared of debris. Rusty threw himself into the role of guardian, barking at every rustle in the weeds until Ethan calmed him with a firm hand. Willow, though timid, soon found joy in following Daniel, her tail wagging shyly whenever he dropped scraps from his sandwich at lunch breaks. By late afternoon on the third day, another figure approached the worksite. He came slowly along the cracked sidewalk, shoulders hunched beneath a military green jacket too thin for the weather. His boots were scuffed, his beard uneven, and his hair hung in loose strands across a gaunt face. Jack Turner, 43, was a veteran like Ethan, though life had not been kind since he'd left the service. His blue eyes, once sharp, were clouded by years of restless nights under bridges and in shelters. His frame was still broad, but lean with hunger, his hands scarred from both work and fights. Jack paused at the edge of the yard, watching as Ethan hammered a beam into place. "Need another pair of hands?" he asked, his voice rough, worn thin by cold and cigarettes. Ethan studied him for a long moment before nodding. "Always." Jack dropped his pack, pulling out gloves that had more holes than fabric, and joined without another word. He moved with the practiced efficiency of a man who had swung a hammer before, his muscles remembering even if his spirit had nearly forgotten. By dusk, sweat dampened his collar, and when Martha handed him a bowl of stew, his gratitude was silent but overwhelming. Later that evening, when most volunteers had gone, Ethan sat on the porch steps with Jack, Rusty lying at his feet and Willow pressed against his side. "You served," Ethan said quietly, noting the way Jack's eyes lingered on the horizon like a man used to scanning for threats. Jack nodded once. "Iraq, 2 tours, came home, found nothing waiting. My wife remarried, jobs dried up, haven't had an address in 5 years. He looked down at his hands, calloused and trembling slightly. "They don't teach you how to stop marching, Ethan, just how to disappear." Ethan felt the words like an echo in his own chest. Maybe Haven's shield can change that. Jack's laugh was low, bitter, but not cruel. "A noble dream. Don't let it kill you." Yet beneath his skepticism flickered something fragile, hope he was too proud to admit. Over the next weeks, the worksite transformed into a community. Volunteers came and went, bringing supplies, tools, and time. Martha oversaw meals, her kitchen warm again after years of solitude. Daniel grew stronger with each passing day, his confidence blooming under Ethan's quiet praise. Jack remained, working harder than anyone, though at night he slept apart, as if afraid to grow too comfortable. Rusty and Willow thrived in the bustle. Rusty became the site's self-appointed watchman, barking at delivery trucks and strangers until Ethan reassured him. Willow, gentle and patient, followed children from the neighborhood who had begun to wander in, offering them licks and soft companionship. Soon, word spread beyond Maplewood. A project was rising in the ruins, led by a man cast out by his own family, aided by a widow, a boy, and a soldier who had once lost everything. But not all whispers were kind. Sarah and Elaine, Ethan's sisters, caught wind of Haven's shield. Sarah's bitterness sharpened, Elaine's pride burned hotter. To them, Ethan's project was proof of wealth they believed should have been theirs. They began speaking in town, casting doubts about his capability, suggesting he was unstable, reckless with money. Though Ethan did not yet hear their words directly, The tension in Maplewood thickened like a storm cloud on the horizon. Still, he pressed on. One evening, as he stood in the shell of a house with Jack at his side, watching the sun bleed red over the fields, Ethan felt something he had not in years: belonging. The sound of laughter drifted from outside where Daniel played fetch with Rusty, Willow bounding clumsily behind. Martha's voice floated through the air, calling them in for supper. Jack leaned against the frame of the unfinished doorway, his eyes softer now. "Maybe," he said, "this place will teach time mercy after all." Ethan looked out at the row of abandoned houses, no longer symbols of despair, but of possibility. Haven's shield was no longer just his father's secret, or his burden. It was becoming a promise. And though he knew challenges still loomed, his sister's schemes, the cost of rebuilding, the weight of expectations, he also knew he was not alone. For the first time, the walls around him did not close in. They opened outward. By late afternoon, the sky over Maplewood had the color of bruised steel, the Missouri River running black beneath it like an unspooled ribbon of ink. Wind came first, long, organ-deep gusts that made the bare cottonwoods shudder and sent plastic tarps flapping against skeletal roof frames along the cul-de-sac where Haven's shield was being born. The air smelled electric and mineral, the way old coins taste on the tongue. Ethan Cole walked the uneven line of houses with his collar up, counting nails by habit, eyes measuring every seam the weather might exploit. Rusty ghosted beside him with the watchful, square-footed gait of a young guardian, head high, ears canted forward. Willow kept closer still, her tail low, amber eyes flicking to Ethan's every time the tarps cracked like whips overhead. From the makeshift tool shed, once a laundry room with the windows knocked out, came the muted clatter of inventory, metal on wood, followed by Martha Green's voice, firm and practical despite her years. She had a navy rain slicker thrown over her thick cardigan, the hood framing the silver braid that fell over one shoulder, and in her face there was only purpose, as if tempests were chores to be handled. Beside her, lanky Daniel Price wrestled a coil of extension cord into a neat loop, freckles standing out against wind-pinked skin. He was colt-legged and eager, his two big rain boots swallowing his jeans. "We'll lose the north tarp if we don't add bracing," Ethan called, pitching his voice over the gusts. "Daniel, grab the ratchet straps. Martha, let's clear the sawhorses inside and stack the sheathing vertically against the interior wall." Martha's answering nod was small and sharp. She had spent years making order out of scarcity. A storm to her was simply another room to tidy. That was when Jack Turner appeared at the corner of the nearest house, moving with that wary, measured readiness shared by men who have learned to read the world for threat. He wore a faded green field jacket and a white hard hat scuffed by labor. The wind pinned his pant legs against his long shins and tugged at the jawline beard that never quite hid the ruin of thinness in his cheeks. Jack's blue eyes were clearer lately, as if labor had sluiced some old silt from them. "Roofline's bowing on number 3. He said, with no waste in his words. "And the south eave is flexing like a fishing rod." Ethan shaded his eyes against the first whip of cold rain and studied the house. The old ranch with the crooked porch, the one whose roof joists they'd sistered but not yet tied. He felt the equation of it resolve in his head: wind load, compromised sheathing, fasteners in old wood. "We brace the interior ridge with 2x4s, he answered, mostly to himself. "Then strap the tarp corners to ground anchors and pray." The rain came suddenly, a thrown sheet of water that flattened grass and stung exposed skin, drawn sideways by a wind that had found its confidence. The cul-de-sac transformed at once. Tarps snapped, rope tails thrashed, and a bucket skittered like a frantic crab across cracked asphalt. In that commotion, Rusty planted his paws and barked a hard, percussive challenge at the storm itself, while Willow pressed against Ethan's shin, trembling but refusing to leave his side. They worked faster. Daniel sprinted with straps slung over one shoulder. Martha shepherded loose tools into totes with a schoolmistress's efficiency. Jack and Ethan carried a ladder to the sagging ranch and levered it into the wind's teeth. The first thunder was a roll, distant, ceremonial. The second struck like a slammed door right above them. Ethan tasted copper and rain and urgency. "I'll go up," Jack said, already one boot on the ladder. Up close he looked older than his 43 years, weather printed into the pleats at the corners of his eyes. But the economy of his movement was intact. The old training, like an exoskeleton, he could still wear when it counted. Ethan's instinct was to say no. He had invited Jack into this work. He would not spend him against a roof. But the wind made conversation a wrestling match, and in Jack's face Ethan saw not recklessness, but a quiet, practical fidelity, the good kind. "Harness," Ethan said instead, shoving the webbing into Jack's hands. Jack buckled without complaint and went up into the wet roar. Ethan followed to the porch roof to pay out strap and secure the anchor points. Below, Daniel dragged a bundle of ground screws from the shed. Martha, in an act of logistics that would have impressed a quartermaster, had already staged a stack of 2x4s by the front door, ends waxed, cut square. The rain became a white noise machine, erasing half the world. Tarps snapped like sails. Rusty trotted the property line, the hair along his spine lifted by wind, barking when a loose trash can careened down the street. Willow huddled under the porch bench until a loose tarp corner flogged the window. Then she leapt out and stood rigid beside Ethan, voice small but insistent, a high, bright trill of alarm that pierced the weather's bass. They were halfway through strapping the north corner when a car nosed into the cul-de-sac too clean for a day like this, paint beaded with water that refused to cling. Even before it stopped, Ethan knew it. The shape slid into place in his mind like a puzzle piece returning to the picture. Sarah's silver sedan. It pulled in at an angle that blocked the mouth of the street, and the driver's door swung wide with a theatrical push. Sarah Cole stepped out first, bundled in a lemon-colored trench coat cinched too tightly at the waist, her ash-blonde hair pinned high beneath a clear plastic rain bonnet like the ones churchwomen wore on bad days. She was willow tall, precise even when the wind tried to disarrange her, eyes cool and assessing as a metronome's tick. Behind her, Elaine Cole emerged more abruptly, shorter, squarer in frame, rain beating on the shoulders of a black wool coat that fattened her silhouette. Her cheeks already ran a high flag of color anger, or cold, or both, and she clutched an oversized leather tote to her chest, as if she were carrying arguments in it like stones. They did not hurry. They angled across the broken street as if weather owed them deferment. Ethan stepped off the porch roof to meet them at ground level, rain flattening his hair, jacket dark as slate. He felt Rusty flow to his left knee like a bodyguard, Willow to his right. "Not a great time," he said, because anger and love share a boundary in the throat. Sarah's smile was a winter sun bright without warmth. "We'll be brief," she said, raising her voice over the wind before glancing around the cul-de-sac with the faintest contraction of nostrils. "We've heard things, Ethan. About father. About money he put aside. $8 million is a great deal to have. Misunderstood." Elaine cut in, words landing like thrown nails. "It isn't just yours. We're your family. We supported you and you're playing philanthropist out here?" Her gaze flicked toward Jack on the roof, just a man in a hard hat to her, and then to the volunteers scrambling in the rain. "With our share?" The storm chose that moment to flex. Wind punched the eave. The north tarp billowed up like the chest of a great fish taking air. Somewhere down the street, a brown recycle bin toppled and skittered sideways like an awkward animal. Above, Jack swore softly, boots squealing as he lunged to catch a gutter that had come loose. The ladder hopped and then settled with a metallic groan. Ethan's body split in two, the part rooted here in the wet conversation and the part flung toward the roofline in reflex. He tasted the choice he did not have time to make. "This project isn't about me," he said, making his voice flat so it wouldn't wobble. "And it sure as hell isn't about you." "Legal share," Elaine insisted, tapping the tote with one lacquered nail. "We spoke to someone. There are avenues." Sarah's face worked in the small theater of someone feigning concern. "You look tired, Ethan. Overextended. Money can be a burden. Let us help. Responsibly." Rusty's bark exploded, one harsh report that made both women flinch despite themselves. With his front paws slightly splayed and his head dropped, he cut his eyes from their faces to Ethan's, reading what mattered there. Willow added her note, a bright stitched-on warning, her body leaning lightly against Ethan's boot as if to anchor him. "Back to the car," Ethan said, finally allowing the steel into his tone. "This is an active site in a storm." He turned to Daniel, who had appeared with a ground screw on one shoulder like a sailor with a spar. "Get inside with Martha. Secure the window sheets. Now." Daniel went. Sarah's mouth tightened. "We're not leaving without," she began, and somewhere above, wood cracked like a bone. All three of them looked up. The tarp had torn from one corner, flipping back with a sick, wet snap. The compromised eave had started to sag, a down-tilted smile pulled by gravity, the fascia spitting a loose rope of caulk. Jack was already moving, half-crouched against the wind, spidering toward the ridge cap. "Ridge brace is failing," he shouted, words ripped sideways. "If the joists go, the south end follows." "Get down," Ethan ordered, but Jack pointed instead, jabbing toward the dark mouth of the half-framed attic access where they'd been keeping maps, permit packets, and schedule boards, everything that would keep the project on schedule if the roofs came apart and insurance adjusters had to be courted by evidence of prudence. "Plans," Jack called. "If this roof goes, we lose the lot." For a heartbeat, Ethan saw the calculus in merciless clarity. Sisters at his flank demanding a slice, volunteers depending on him to be the adult in the room, a roof full of the only order they had asking to be saved by a man who had already lost too much. He bolted for the porch, Rusty right with him, Willow refusing to be peeled off. Sarah shouted something about attorneys. Elaine shouted something about fairness. The storm swallowed both. Inside, the unfinished house smelled of green lumber and blown dust. The world was a noise of nails and rain. Martha met Ethan at the doorway with a tote of Ziplocs and a roll of duct tape, eyes bright like a commander's. "Plans go in these. Waterproof them, then down the hall closet," she said. And Ethan loved her in that moment with a swift, filial gratitude that rearranged something in his ribs. He took the bags and lunged through studs toward the attic access. Jack was already inside silhouette against lightning, balanced on the collar ties, his long arms grabbing the cardboard tube of plans and the clipboard calendar and the bound packet of grant paperwork that Martha had highlighted to shy the eye into important lines. The roof sheet above them bowed like a lung. The sound it made was a warning and a plea. "Toss," Ethan called, palms up. Jack threw true the tube first, then the clipboard, then the fat paper packet cinched in a rubber band. Ethan snatched them one after another and fed them to Martha, who bagged and taped with ruthless economy, sliding each sealed parcel into the hall closet as if stowing lifeboats. The attic groaned. A soffit peeled back with a sound like Velcro the size of a car. Jack started forward along the joists and the board under his right foot split along a dead knot. He dropped to a knee, caught himself with one palm on a truss cord, breath bursting out between his teeth, then pushed up and kept coming. Ethan was already reaching, one hand extended, the other steadying the ladder. Just a man holding onto another man because that is what men do when they have made a promise without making a speech. Jack's glove met Ethan's wrist, tendons braided. They found purchase and Jack came out of the dark, boots thumping the rung, face set in that private, unsentimental joy of someone who has beaten a small, deserving thing. They dragged the ladder back as a section of sheathing let go and the attic exhaled into rain. Behind them, in the front room, Daniel was bracing a sheet of OSB against the window opening, teeth bared with effort. Willow darted to nip at his bootlaces as if to remind him to be careful, while Rusty planted himself in the doorway like a squat, low-chested wall, letting the storm bark while he simply was. Outside, the sisters had taken shelter beneath the shallow porch of House 2, arms locked around themselves, hair wet, coats speckled dark with blown rain. Elaine's expression had gone pinched, indignant at Weather's refusal to honor her status. Sarah's had shifted from cold certainty to a narrow, frightened attention, the unprepared person's first respect for physics. When Ethan stepped back onto the porch with Jack and Martha behind him and the sealed tube of plans under one arm, Sarah found her voice. "This discussion isn't over," she said, shaking rain from the plastic bonnet brim, her tone reassembled from the pieces of her earlier poise. "We will expect our share. We'll be in touch. Formally." Elaine hugged the tote tighter, chin down, eyes glittering in a way that passed for resolve in small rooms. "You can play hero all you want," she said over a gust that tried to carry her words away. "But paper is paper. We have rights." Lightning strobed. Thunder arrived with the weight of a falling safe. Ethan did not answer. He did not have to. The project's heart beat in the sealed tube under his arm and in the 10,000 small acts of care that had made it possible. Martha's neat labels, Daniel's bruised thumbs, Jack's sure balance on wet joists, the dog's raw, unpracticed courage. The storm had come for their roof. The sisters had come for his resolve, and both had found that the frame was stronger than it looked. Another gust tore at the eave, and somewhere a sawhorse went over with a clatter. "Inside," Ethan said to the team, and he turned away from the sisters not as dismissal but as triage, because some doors you close for the hour and some you close for good. Rusty backed with him, never taking his eyes off the women. Willow gave one last high warning note and then touched her nose to Ethan's leg as if stamping him back into himself. Jack brushed rain from his lashes and leaned one shoulder against the entry, chest still working, the cracked smile of a man who has chosen a side written in the corners of his mouth. "Plans are dry," Martha reported, patting the closet door like the flank of a good horse. "Materials stacked, windows braced." Ethan nodded, breath fogging, listening with a carpenter's ear as the wind tested the structure and the structure answered. "I am here. I am holding." Outside, the sisters' car door slammed. Tires spun water. Taillights dissolved down the street in a red smear. The cul-de-sac was storm and work and breath and the small, holy racket of people refusing to let something good be taken. And there, in the threshold between wind and shelter, Ethan stood with the tube of plans in his fist and the dogs at his boots, feeling the scale of the moment tilt family pressing from one side, weather from the other, and the weight of a community in the middle, knowing the choice he would make had already been made by who he had become. He set the plans on the entry table and looked up into the trembling rafters. The roof creaked. The storm spoke. Jack's steady hand closed on a stack of salvaged lumber as if gathering it to safety. The dogs watched the door. The demand still hung in the air like thunder waiting for its echo. The storm had broken the town's night into jagged hours, but when the morning finally came, Maplewood was transformed. The river glinted pale gold under a sky scrubbed clean, its surface rippled but calm, and the cul-de-sac that had trembled under thunder now lay strewn with branches, sodden tarps, and the scent of wet lumber. The houses, battered yet standing, looked like tired boxers who had taken their hits and still held their ground. Ethan Cole walked slowly along the sidewalk, his boots sinking into the damp earth where the grass had been flattened by wind. His shoulders sagged with exhaustion, his body hollowed out by the long night, but his jaw was set with the kind of determination that did not bend easily. Rusty trotted at his heel, mud caked up to his belly fur, his gait proud as if he had been the night's true guardian. Willow padded on the other side, her tan coat clumped with damp but her eyes bright, pressing her body against Ethan's leg with quiet reassurance. Inside one of the houses, Martha Green was already at work. She had traded her slicker for a faded plaid blouse and worn corduroy trousers tucked into rubber boots. At 78, her back bent slightly when she moved, but she carried a broom with authority, sweeping debris into neat piles. Her silver braid, still damp at the ends, swung with each motion. Though her face bore the wear of decades of solitude, her blue eyes gleamed with fierce satisfaction, as if weather and family scheming alike had failed to undo what they had begun. Daniel Price stumbled in a few minutes later, yawning, his hair sticking out in tufts. He wore a hoodie patched at the elbows and jeans that had been hastily dried by the diner's kitchen stove where his mother worked. He looked every bit the 17-year-old, clumsy with fatigue, but he carried himself with pride. "Roof's still up," he announced, voice cracking slightly as if the storm had made him older overnight. Willow bounded toward him, licking his hand, and the boy laughed despite his weariness. Jack Turner emerged from the back room, shoulders hunched but face alive with a grim smile. His field jacket was torn at the sleeve and his beard was peppered with wood dust, yet his blue eyes held a light that had not been there before, the clarity of a man who had risked much and come out standing. He leaned on the doorframe, wiping his palms on his jeans. "We kept the plans dry. That's more than luck." His voice was rough, but beneath it there was pride. Not the hollow pride of survival, but the steady pride of belonging again. By noon, the neighborhood had begun to stir. Neighbors who had once peered at the project with doubt now appeared with buckets and gloves, offering to haul branches or bring coffee. A retired teacher brought muffins. A local mechanic showed up with tarps salvaged from his garage. Even the skeptical sheriff, Dale Harmon, returned, his wool coat dusted with leaves, and though he said little, he helped nail loose siding until his palms reddened. The storm had done what no meeting could. It had forced the town to see Haven's Shield as something theirs, not merely Ethan's dream. But elsewhere, Sarah and Elaine were unraveling. Word of their confrontation with Ethan in the storm had spread fast, whispered first in the diner, then across church pews and storefronts. People shook their heads at the selfishness of women who had tried to stake a claim while others were fighting to save homes. Sarah, tall and composed but now brittle, found her bookkeeping clients canceling quietly, their trust gone. Elaine, red-cheeked and defensive, quarreled with her husband Richard until he stopped answering altogether. Within weeks, they sold their belongings and left Maplewood under a veil of silence, their once upright posture bent beneath the weight of shame. Ethan, meanwhile, stood before the cul-de-sac with a different kind of resolve. He had taken the sealed envelope to a lawyer in town, ensuring the trust would be placed into a public foundation with every transaction transparent, every dollar accounted for. He announced Haven's Shield openly, not as his inheritance but as the community's promise. Homes rebuilt for veterans without shelter, kennels for working dogs retired from service, workshops where hands scarred by war could still build something worthy. He refused to let $8 million become bait for greed. Instead, it became mortar for dignity. The day of the opening came at last. The winter air was sharp but bright, the sky a dome of crystalline blue. The row of houses, once broken and abandoned, now stood painted in warm colors, porches mended, windows glowing. A banner stretched across the entrance, Haven's Shield, a place to begin again. A crowd gathered townsfolk, veterans, volunteers, faces lit with cautious joy. On the small wooden stage, Ethan stood tall in a clean uniform shirt, his hair trimmed, his hazel eyes tired but steady. Rusty and Willow sat at either side of him, leashes slack, tails thumping rhythmically against the platform boards. Their amber eyes scanned the crowd as if to remind everyone that this moment was guarded. Martha, dressed in her neatest cardigan with a brooch pinned at her collar, stood in the front row. Her hands trembled slightly as she clapped, tears glimmering in her eyes not from sorrow, but from the relief of finally belonging somewhere again. Daniel stood next to her, fidgeting but proud, his freckles flushed with cold. Behind them, Sheriff Harmon gave a solemn nod. Jack Turner stood beside Ethan on stage, his posture straighter than it had been in years. He wore a simple work shirt, sleeves rolled, scars visible but unhidden. His beard was trimmed, and though his face remained gaunt, there was a steadiness in the way he looked at Ethan, like a brother who had found family not by blood, but by trial. Ethan cleared his throat, his voice carrying steady across the assembly. Haven's Shield doesn't belong to me, he said. It belongs to everyone who has been cast aside and needs a place to stand again. My father left me the means, but it was never meant as fortune. It was meant as seed. Today we plant it here, together. The crowd erupted into applause, warm and unrestrained. Rusty barked once, as if adding his approval. Willow pressed her head gently into Ethan's hand, her amber eyes soft. For the first time in years, Ethan felt not exile but homecoming. That evening, as lanterns glowed from the porches of Haven's Shield and laughter drifted through the crisp night air, Ethan returned to his small office. On the desk lay an envelope, yellowed but unopened, one he had overlooked in the wooden box. His hands shook as he broke the seal. Inside was a letter written in Robert Cole's cramped but steady hand. My son, it began, if you are reading this, the burden has found you. Do not see it as wealth. See it as seed. Land and money are not ends. They are soil. What grows depends on the gardener. I trust you to plant not for yourself, but for those who have none. Remember this truth. Riches are nothing but stones until love and loyalty give them roots. Contre qua kai chi lahat young. Tin iu valam trungtain moila mindat chachung ne mum. Ethan pressed the paper to his chest, eyes closed, breath steady. Rusty curled at his feet, Willow leaned against his knee, and Jack's laughter echoed faintly from outside, where Martha and Daniel were lighting the lanterns. For the first time, Ethan understood. Family was not something lost behind a closed door, but something forged in sacrifice and kept alive in acts of love. This story reminds us that money, houses, and even blood ties mean little if they are not grounded in love and loyalty. True family is not always the one we are born into, but the one we build through kindness, sacrifice, and trust. In everyday life, it can be as simple as standing by a friend in need, opening our doors to someone who feels forgotten, or showing compassion to those who carry invisible burdens. If this message touched your heart, I invite you to share this video with someone who might need encouragement today. Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and if you believe in the power of hope and loyalty, write Amen in the comments. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel so more people can hear stories that remind us of faith, resilience, and the quiet miracles around us. May God bless you and your family, and may He guide us all to build our own havens of love in the world.